Well, hello everybody and welcome to another video tutorial. My name is Peter Drakulic. In Blender, you can force a particle system to follow the shape of a path or a Bezier curve. So in this simple scene, I have added a simple plane. I have set this plane to be the emitter, and I have assigned to this plane a particle system. I have also set from down here as a duplicate object for my particle system a simple cube. Alright. Also, I have set the gravity influence for my particle system to 0. Okay, now if I play back the animation, you can see that my particles are traveling in a straight line. Alright, let me stop the animation and let me switch over to the top view. And I now want to add a curve, Bezier curve, to my scene. Let me scale up my curve. I rotate it along the z-axis by 90 degrees. And let me give some shape to this curve. Let me subdivide it. And let me give it a shape like so. Alright. Now if I play back the animation, you can see that nothing happens. And my particles are traveling along a straight line. Alright. But now having selected the curve, I'm going to assign to my curve from the physics button over here a force field. From the pop-up selector here, I'm selecting curve guide. Alright. Now if I play back the animation, you can see that the particles are following the general shape of my curve. The curve is behaving pretty much like a magnet, alright, and it attracts the particles around its shape. Okay, another thing that you might have noticed is that now my particles are moving much more slowly, and we're going to see why in just a moment. So from the sub-panel over here, for the force fields, okay, for the curve guide force field, there are many options you can adjust, but there are a couple of options here that are the most important ones, and these are the options I'm going to talk to you about. First of all, the clamping option. The clamping option allows you practically to adjust the shape of these particles flow, whatever particles group here. And also, you can make the particles by adjusting this clamping feature to follow more tightly the general shape of the curve. So let me play back the animation, and I want to show you how this works. For the moment, the clamping amount is set to 0. Okay? So let me set the clamping amount to something like -1. You can see that instantly the behavior of the particles has changed. Right? Now, by scrubbing this slider over here, the shape slider, hold down Shift if you want, you can interactively and effectively adjust the shape of your particle system. Right? You can see. Now, the more you bring this slider to the lowest value, the more tightly the particles are following the curve here, the path, you can see. Right? So you can constrain really all the particles to follow the curve by adjusting both the amount and the shape. And if I gave to the shape another value, let's say +1, or you can see now the difference in the shape. Now if I give to the amount the value of +1, now the particles are starting to concentrate somewhere here at the end of the path. All right? You can see the difference. If I switch over to the side view, you can see the difference. Okay? Now that's a very important thing. Another thing I want to talk to you about is this free slot here. All right? This free, actually this guy here is a little bit the description is a little bit misleading. Actually, what this does practically is that it allows you to interactively and effectively set the speed of the particles. So now, for the moment, the particles are moving really slowly, all right, very slowly. So if I set this to a value like, let's say, minus 0.300, you can see that they are accelerating. So what this slider does is that it tells the particles how much of their life to spend on the curve. So if I set the free factor here, the free value, down to 0, so now the particles are not free, and they have to spend all of their life, meaning the life of the particles is now, if you can see, if I select my emitter and I want to show you that the life of the particles is set, I have set this to 250 frames. So when the free is set to 0, the particles will have to spend all of their life on the curve. That's why they have slowed down. But as I'm increasing this value, the particles don't have to spend all of their life on the curve, so they can be free to travel beyond the curve. So practically they are free to reach closer their initially set value, which is, by the way, if I can show you, it's minus 200 speed units. So now, the more I'm increasing this value, the more the particles are reaching their originally set speed, so the more they are accelerating. So if you set this all the way up, you can see that the particles, they are reaching their minus 200 units value very, very quickly. But at the same time, they follow the curve. Another very important factor is the minimum and maximum distance. Well, the distance that is more important is the use max feature. So we can set a maximum distance for the influence of the force field here. So if I check on this use max feature, I mean this button over here, I can set the maximum distance. You can see a circle that is drawing now in the scene, and this circle for the moment does not affect, because the limits are not touching the emitter, they don't affect the particle system. So I have to increase it slightly until, let me switch over to the side view, until it reaches the plane. When it intersects with the plane, you can see now, some of the particles are going to be affected by the curve guide. Let me show you this. You can see some particles are affected and some others not. So here, if I draw you the intersection, we have an intersection between the sphere of influence of maximum distance and the emitter. So all the particles that are spit out, that are being emitted in this area, will follow the curve, whereas the particles that are beyond this intersection, around this little area here, they won't be affected, and they will keep their original value of minus 200 speed units, plus they are going to be traveling in a straight line. Now, if I set the maximum distance to something like so, now all of the particles, because the intersection now is much bigger, actually the entire plane is inside the sphere of influence, you can see that all the particles are moving along the path. So you can interactively adjust this by using this maximum distance slider. All right. Now let me uncheck this really quick, and I want to show you yet another thing. Right, now let me stop the animation, switch over to the top view, and I want to duplicate this curve. Alright, let me duplicate this curve by holding down Shift D and bring this curve, make yet another curve guide somewhere here. Alright, So now we have two curves, all right, and let me change the shape of this curve here. Let me give it another shape. Maybe I could add yet another point here, and let me give it another shape. All right, now let me play back the animation. You can see now that the particles are moving under the influence of two curve guides, all right, which is very, very important. So you can have multiple curves that are affecting the movement of the particles. And for each one of these curves, you can use a maximum distance, all right? So if I, for example, set the maximum distance for this curve to be somewhat like so, and then you can see the sphere here, the circle of influence, and then I am doing the same thing for the other sphere here. You can see that as I'm scrubbing the slider of the influence, the particles are changing. It's like a magnet, are changing, and they're following either this curve or the other curve. So that's very interesting, I think, very important. So you can interactively create very, very complex animations just by using two or more curves and by adjusting the maximum distance of each one of those curves until you get the effect or the result you're going for. Alright, so now we have also a fall of power here, which is a rather weird feature. So let me really quick delete this curve here, and I have just one curve, and if I go to the fall of power here and I hold down shift, you can see that as I'm moving the sliders, I'm scrubbing the slider, I have a fall off of the force field around the area of the curve. So that's a feature which well, actually it can give you very strange results, so I'm not recommending for you to use it. But if you have a fall of power, let's say of 10, you have a very, very strong fall off, you have a very little influence, whereas for intermediate values you can have something in between. Alright, so let me set this to something like, I don't know, maybe something like 2. You can see I have some strange behavior here, alright, but you can play around with the fall off value until you get the results you're going for. Another very useful feature I would like to talk to you about is that you can control the movement of the particles by setting the weights of the control points of the curve. So if you check this weights button over here, click on that. Now the weights of each one of the control points of the curve has an influence on the movement, on the motion of the particles. But how can you set those weights? Well, you have to tab into edit mode, and then you have to select one of those control points. Let me select this in the middle, and then press N to bring this side panel over here, and then you can see a weight slider over here. Now you can adjust the slider in such a way that you can give more or less weight to your control point, depending upon how much weight you have assigned to this control point. The movement of the particles will be affected once, provided that you have enabled this option over here. So let me set the weight of this control point to 0. So this control point now has no influence on the movement of the particles, whereas this one with weight of 1, it has some. Let's give it some more weight, something like 1. Now this control point now has an influence on the movement of the particles, whereas those two that have 0 weights or close to 0, they don't have any influence whatsoever. So you can make the points of the curve to behave kind of magnets. Let me select this control point and give it a more weight, some more weight. Let's give it weight of 1. Now you can see this control point also attracts the particles. Whereas this one does not, because it doesn't have any weight, it doesn't have any weight whatsoever. So that's another very useful option, I think. So I hope I've shown you how you can create some very interesting and very complex animations of particle systems by using this curve guide force field. The most important features of this curve guide field is, in my opinion, the clamping feature. I've shown you before how to use it, that can adjust the shape of interactively the shape of the particle system. The free here option that can accelerate or slow down the movement of the particles, and the weights option, in which, thanks to which you can interactively set the weight of each one of the control points of your curve, and so you can, depending on that, you can influence, you can change the way the particles are being attracted by the curve, by the force field. So also you have the use max feature, and you can set how much of the particles are going to be affected, influenced by the force field. So that concludes our tutorial for today. I hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something from this. If you like this tutorial, don't forget to subscribe. See you next time with a hopefully interesting topic, hopefully soon. Until then, have fun and goodbye.